In this part 2 of maintenance, we will be going over the first level or layer of the maintenance mode. So when we access the menu, we're going to select maintenance, and inside of maintenance we will be sticking within this layer instead of going into the second maintenance layer like we did in the previous video. This will go over the user spec setup, module spec setup, and the scale spec setup, and any of these other various features that we may be adding, like USB image transfer. These settings are where you would change things like feed the label after you open and close the printer door, which is required for it to function. You can make it automatic, things to that nature. So let's start with the most important section of configuring a scale, which is user spec. When you're setting up the scale and the way that it is going to function, in these settings here, you're going to be dealing with the most configurable settings. So if we were to access, let's just say, price related, we can go in here and see the different options where we can find more settings, where if they're manually entering prices, you can set the scale to allow a manual price entry outside of using the unit price change feature. And there's multiple settings that can work with this to make it easier or more difficult, or provide the operator with some variation to the way that they can enter in their settings. Under like unit price, we're not going to go into all of these, but you have different things where like unit price limitation, things like that are already set to certain values that is default, that comes from the manufacturer, which don't really need to be changed. You can go into any of these spec settings and see exactly the different variations and different changes that you can make. For the most part, nothing is changed unless you're aware that it is needed by the customer. Kind of like being able to override a PLU at any given time, allow and make it default enable. Right now it's set to default is disabled and inhibit for certain reasons. So that's just the default setup. Navigating these menus can be as easy as searching for a setting. We're looking for a particular price setting. We press enter. It's going to give us a list of all the different settings with the word price in it. Now this can limit what you need to search for. I've been in situations where I'm looking for a price change, but it's things about allowing zero value and then it's for price. So that might not have the word price in it, but it allows for a certain value to be zero when printing, etc., etc. So using the keyword specific search can be difficult at times if you're looking for a specific kind of setting. For the most part, if you have exhausted any route to find a type of setting to see if it's available for the customer, you can give Digi a call, who can provide you with information relatively quickly. They do respond very well and have usually good information on whether or not you can do something. So you can navigate these different settings and see exactly what needs to be changed. You're going to see a lot of tax and currency based things that don't have any concern for us, as again stated in previous videos. We do not set these up as cash registers. A lot of these are going to be default settings for like printing positions and things like that, for the different various format information that is the actual data that comes off of the label, that comes onto the label itself. So we search for different things like price or format and different names if you need to find a setting to adjust things if it's possible, and this is where you're going to do it. You'll eventually deal with certain settings over and over, and you'll know what they are, and then it'll allow you to navigate the different menus just that much easier. You have these coded numbers here, 1418047, which is for the 2D barcode data format for receipt. You can put in this code if you write these down. There's a few of them on the knowledge base that I believe Josh has done well to keep around so that we can search for them directly, because we know we're going to be affecting them and changing them when we get them from default, because Digi always sends it in the same setup and we change them based on what our customer is usually like. And we'll have a basic file copy that would include these new changes for our sites, but oftentimes we just go out of box and then for the site get the information on what we're going to change, so we don't overlap between different sites unless it makes it easier for us to put the information in. Again, you have a bunch of different options that you can choose from just to navigate, and inside settings there's even more. I've been through a good amount of these. Some of them I've never been in, like I've stated before, like web browser. It's never used on our end on what we deal with, and it'll become pretty known what you use and what you don't use. Screensaver is important to change sometimes, special messages, etc. You'll just get accustomed to going in and out of these menus as you begin programming the scales. In module spec, it's very similar to user spec, except it has expanded settings that adjust the way the operators can use the scales that aren't in normal specs for user specs. When you go into the module spec, it's going to also ask for a password because you're making changes that change the way the scale normally operates from the manufacturer, and you need to have the code, which is 6289, so that you can access this menu and make changes that normally can't be changed without it. I can't bring up anything specific, but oftentimes you will see where this password system will be set to yes in user spec, but you can't change any of the specs underneath it. It'll be grayed out. This is where you would have to go into module spec to make these changes. Reason being is if you go into the user spec and you have the password system set to no and you turn it on, certain areas of the menu you can't access anymore unless you know the password, if a password has been set previously. So if you make these changes ahead of time and forget that you have things set or not set, you can lock yourself out of certain areas, and you may have to default the scale to be able to access certain sections. We've had a customer who used to have a customer number to sign into the menu in the maintenance, and over a period of time, a couple of years, they never accessed it from the scale level because they were using RSM to input their data, and they forgot what those codes were, and we weren't able to access them. And we don't have those codes on hand because they made them specific for themselves once we instructed them on how to do it. So we had to go around that by other avenues, is turning on the span switch. Before you reboot the scale, it'll boot into the menu so that you can access the menu and make changes to the passwords, outside of having to let it load up and then trying to remember these passwords and being completely locked from making any changes at the scale level. So things like that is where you would go into module spec and make changes in different settings that normally are grayed out here. Oftentimes they're also grayed out because you're just not set to a setting, and those settings can't be changed unless you're in module spec. So here you would only be in this part if you can't make the changes in user spec mode. And very similarly in scale spec, you also have a code to access this menu, which is 3846, and then press the PLU button, and this will allow you to change the scale price, tax, tear, and others. That's separate from the second layer from the previous video, maintenance, where you had the weights and measure specs. This is where you can change levels without having to change that span switch, which is the mechanism for accessing the weights and measure section of this is the weighing and the tearing, because a lot of those settings can't be changed on the spot because we don't want customers to make changes to scales, or the thought behind it is preventing customers from changing things after they're installed to better suit the customer side rather than, the business side rather than the customer side for the grocery retail location. So it's a security feature that the DigiScale company, scale companies put in to prevent malcontent. So with here you have like forced tear, things like that you can change, one-touch tear. You can disable, change the way that things operate to make it easier or harder based on the customer, and it's whether on us to gauge how the customers are going to use these features that they use. Similar to where one of our customers has manual pricing enabled, to where you can put in a manual price rather than weigh a scale, which allows them to go above the 30-pound limit for that scale. But that has to be able to be displayed onto the label so that it is identified that it is a manual price entry for the customer, so they can see the difference, whether or not they understand that on the label given at the time that they're reading it. But it is required, I'm not sure if it's by law, I'm assuming it is, for it to be recognized as a change, because the scale has limited to 30 pounds, and with the weight classes of the different scales, that is the limitation for this individual device. And being able to set a manual weight allows them to use boxed labels so that they can price them and have them scan on the front, so that the customers don't go up and have the price change and not have the correct weight on it, or prevents the cashier from having to scan 4 labels because they have a 120-pound box of seafood that they're selling for $850. They only have 1 label on there because they can actually weigh that box with the box tear and have an accurate price for their store, so that they don't lose any money and they don't overcharge the customer at the same time. Okay, now to get back on track, you have these different features again that you can navigate to find out how it needs to be set up, and that's scale spec. So in maintenance mode, this is pretty much all you'll be dealing with. And lastly, the USB image transfer. This is where you would have a USB set up with folder structure, one on the root directory that's going to be called common, that would take in BMP images, and then another root directory folder that has HTML with 2 subdirectories where it has images and videos, where you can have videos downloaded or uploaded into the scale, and images. And this is where you would set things like the customer display having the store logo so it's more personalized to them. You can add advertisements added onto the screen and rotating. You can add images to the labels so that it has their logo on the label, so that customers have that visual name recognition for that site. Helps, bring them back to the store and things like that. And this is where you would do that. And the USB device is pretty common in how we would transfer data to the scales. So to finish up the maintenance section of the menu, when you have a USB backup restored, you can use that feature. I have yet to use it myself because we use a redisk program to copy over the program itself off of the SD card that's inside the device, which makes it real easy for setting up new scales of the same mechanical structure. So an SM5300BX would work with a BX, but not with a B because of the program differences. And likewise with the other devices that have an SD card to be able to make copies with. So we're going to press menu here and bring us back to this menu and set us up for the next video, where we're going to be dealing in programming, where that is the big setup for getting a customer to be able to use a scale, label product, and make a sale with the labels that we create.